None of them are true, but thank you very much for having me. That's the only thing that's true. That's the only thing that's true. So thank you very much for having me tonight. I really appreciate this opportunity. Seeing all your faces is wonderful. So we're going to talk a little bit about specifically one topic, but hopefully we'll explain some bigger ideas and bigger concepts. So the first thing, I'll just give a little more background on myself. I currently teach in Ramaz High School in Manhattan, and I'm a graduate student in Jewish history. So every once in a while there's a discussion amongst the faculty about the most appropriate way to teach the topic of science and religion. It's like a burning issue. The students in 9th grade study biology, and 11th grade they study physics, and 12th grade they're studying astronomy or earth science or biology again. So every once in a while they have this conversation, how should we teach science and religion? So I said, why don't we try to blend my two fields, teaching rabbinic sources, rabbinic texts, and history. And that's what I came up with this packet a while ago. It's been changed and modified over the years, but this is what I want to talk to you about, how science really affected Jews looking at nature. So we're going to start by looking at the two pictures you have in front of you. I guess this is kind of awkward because if you're looking at it on the video, you won't see the pictures, but it's kind of like listening to the radio and having them talk about something they're seeing. But either way, this is a camera. Either way, we're going to look at these two pictures in front of us, and we're going to talk about what they are. It's just a springboard for the entire conversation. So these two images you have come from a book called Ma'aseh Tuvia. Ma'aseh Tuvia was a science textbook written in Hebrew by a Renaissance man, a literal Renaissance man. He was a Jew who was born in the city of Metz. He studied in some of the most illustrious universities. Eventually he ended up in Jerusalem, and he lived from 1650 to 1729. His name was Tuvia HaKohen Katz, or Tobias Cohen. I actually saw someone refer to him as Toby. Maybe they were really good friends, but I would not give him a nickname, but I didn't know him. But either way, these are two images that come from his book about science. Fascinatingly, if you go to the Center for Jewish History on 16th Street, there is a huge picture of a house. But it's actually the body of a man, and each room in the house is a different organ. This comes from his book, and it's like kind of weird why it's there, but it's a beautiful illustration showing how the beginning of the scientific era, they were trying to explain the phenomenon they were discovering. He actually agrees with Harvey's circulation of the blood against Galen, which is against the Rambam's opinion. So he was someone who was, very knowledgeable about nature, about science. We'll call it science, not nature. And he has an entire chapter about astronomy, the study of the heavenly spheres and planets. So these are two images that come from your book, from his work. And if the picture on the left, we'll start with that. What is that a picture of? So if you look in the middle, it says Eretz. Eretz is earth, the world. And then going out in concentric circles, you have the different spheres. Mayim tachtonim, chalal shebein rakia lemayim tachton. Then you have shamayim, you have the sun, you have the moon, you have the planets. Then you have mayim elyonim, which I don't know what it is. Gilgul I can't even read that word. These fires at the end of the earth. But either way, it kind of looks awesome. It's beautiful. It's mysterious. It's exotic looking. The sun has a face.
Whose face is that?
I don't know whose face it is. Maybe his mother, maybe his sister. I don't know. Whosever face it is, but it's beautiful in terms of this being the conception of the world. But if you look to the right, this is another view of the world, of the universe, sorry. You have in the middle, you have the Shemesh.
Or that's much later.
He is writing this in 1650, in the 1700s. Oh. So these are the two conceptions of the universe that he has, that he understands. So to the right, though, you have a different conception of the universe. In the middle is Shemesh, then Kochav, Noga, Those are, I think, Mercury and Venus. Then you have Ha'eretz v'halavana savivla, the earth with the moon going around it. Ma'adim is Mars. Tzedek is Saturn. Jupiter. Shabtai is Saturn. You can tell how much I know about astronomy. But either way, so this is his conception, and it's clear the difference is very stark just from a aesthetic perspective. The right side is sterile. It's dry. It's not mysterious. If anything, it's boring. It's kind of like, when you put the two side by side, it's so clear which model of the universe he seems to be leaning towards. And this is what we're going to talk about today, about really how the model on the right that had the sun in the center had such an effect on the psyche of all the people living at the time that it had a dramatic effect in world history. So we're going to start, if you turn the page in your packet to page 2, it's not page numbers, but these are some of the things we're going to cover. I don't think we're going to get through everything. You're more than welcome to keep this for your own edification. But what we're going to start with is traditional and classic approaches to the study of nature. Faith through nature. Classically, nature was the vehicle that people used to find God. Think about it like this. In the Siddur, there's an entire section of brachot you make for lightning, for thunder, for these amazing events, natural scenes, the Grand Canyon, the oceans. These are ways to find God. And it's clear from even a basic looking at Tehillim. If you turn to page 3, page 3 here is one of the famous parak of Tehillim, Psalm 19, verse 2. We'll start from verse 1 just for the sake of it. Lamnatseach mizmor leDavid, hashamayim misaprim kvod el, u'maseh yadav magid harakia. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the earth, depending on translation, or the firmament, shows his handiwork. Meaning, the heavens are the most awe-inspiring part of God's creation. They always tell you if you're in camp or in a place where you could see the vastness of the universe, you're almost awestruck and you're humbled by how small you are and feeling in God's presence. And that's what the David HaMelech is telling us, that if you want to know God, look at the sky. Hashamayim misaprim kvod kelel. The heavens are the place that declares the glory of God. And again, if you look at, turn the page to page 4, this is Psalm 104. These are the most famous verses that many people know. If you look where the red arrow is in verse 24, Ma rabu masecha Adonai. How manifold are your creations, Hashem. Kulam b'chachma asita. Malaya arts kinyanecha. In wisdom you have created them all. The earth is full of your creatures. Ze'ayam gadol v'rachav yadayim sham remes ve'ein mispar chayot ktanot im gedolot. This sea, great and wide in it, creeping things innumerable, living animals both small and great. Meaning, if you want to know God, like I always heard people tell me, if you want to feel like you're in God's presence, go to the Grand Canyon. It's so big, it's natural, it's this incredible experience where you'll feel God. And this was the classic approach that Jews had for centuries. That it's the best way to know God is to study and look at nature. Look at the world around you. And this is, it was even codified by Maimonides on page 5. So if you turn to page 5, this is a lengthy passage. I usually don't like reading lengthy things, but we'll read it together in the yellow. This is Maimonides, the Rambam's Mishnah Torah, Hilchot Yesodei HaTorah, the fundamentals of the Torah, chapter 2, sorry, it's a typo. It's chapter 2, 1 and 2. So this is the beginning, the Rambam's magnum opus, the Mishnah Torah. He begins his entire work on the fundamentals of the Torah by stating in Halacha 1, it is a mitzvah to love and fear this glorious and awesome God. As it says in Deuteronomy, this is the Shema, and you shall love God your Lord. And as it says in Deuteronomy, fear God your Lord. So there's a mitzvah to love and fear God. We're all familiar with that, but what's unique is what the Rambam says in Halacha 2. What is the path to attain love and fear of Him? When a person contemplates his wondrous and great deeds and creations and appreciates his infinite wisdom that surpasses all comparison, he will immediately love, praise, and glorify him. So, meaning, he says, if you want to love or fear God, study nature. And he says, yearning with tremendous desire to know God's great name, as David stated, as King David said in Tehillim, my soul thirsts for the Lord, for the living God. When he continues to reflect on these same matters, he will immediately recoil in awe and fear, appreciating how he is tiny, lowly, and dark creature standing with his flimsy, limited wisdom before he who is perfect knowledge. Meaning, if you want to love and you want to fear God, what's the way to do it? Go to the Grand Canyon. Look out at the stars. This is the classic approach that for generations, not just Jews, Christians, Muslims, any religious God-fearing person would approach God through nature. And then something happened. And who? Okay. There are others who disagreed, and we're going to look at someone more modern who disagrees also. But this was the Rambam, and this was literally this was the classic approach. And what you'll see is there's a major shift in the history of ideas and the way people approached the world. So if you look at page 6, this comes from a book called Religion and Science. We're not going to do all of it, but it's a wonderful book written by someone named Ian Barbour. I don't know if you pronounce it Barbour or Barbour. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Either way, it's a phenomenal book. It's a textbook in some places. I think the one I got from the library was a textbook because someone underlined it. Those are not my underlines. Just they happen to be the best places to underline. So either way, so what we're going to talk about tonight is what changed between the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries in terms of how people understood the cosmos and the heavens. Generally, how man was to approach nature. Meaning, in the past, there was a certain way to approach nature and to study it, and to ultimately how to view themselves in this greater world, in this greater universe. But then things changed during those 3 centuries, 15th, 16th, and 16th, 17th, 18th centuries. There's a major ideological shift that many people have said was the most important shift in approach in the history of mankind. So we'll read a little bit about what was things pre-16th century. So if you look, there's a red arrow in the middle of the page, turn it sideways, page 5, number 2 on the bottom. It says, nature as created hierarchy. Aristotelian cosmology and Christian theology were merged to form the medieval picture of the universe. Earth was fixed to the center sphere, surrounded by the concentric spheres of the heavens. So this is important. 2 important things they already told us. The earth was in the center, and there were concentric spheres in the heavens. The planets in the Ptolemaic theory, Ptolemy was an Egyptian astronomer. Ptolemy, he was an Egyptian astronomer who was the one who made famous the geocentric, like earth, geography, the geocentric model. And his was basically what was accepted for 2,000, almost thousands of years, 1,500 years. So Ptolemy, again, the Ptolemaic model had Earth in the center, these concentric circles. So if you look at the top of page 6, what's really page 7, followed circles whose centers were attached to moving spheres. Heavenly objects, being perfect and incorruptible, were said to make use only of the perfect form, the circle. The geocentric, earth-centered scheme was easily visualized and corresponded to the common sense experience of the solidity of the earth. This is a key line. Here, position and destiny coincided, meaning everything was great. It was a beautiful model. If you were to God and to create the universe, wouldn't this be the way you would do it? You'd have Earth in the center, these beautiful circles going around with perfect planets that are going around it. Earth is in the center. It's easy. It makes sense. So the line is position of the universe, the form and structure coincided with man's conception of himself. If you skip down a little, he says, it was a law-abiding world, but the laws were moral, not mechanical. Meaning, it made sense from a moral perspective. So if you look down a little more, where there's a red arrow, and someone put a bracket there, not me. Note finally that nature was assumed to be essentially static, with all its species created in the present form. This is a very important topic for in a couple of weeks. It was a completed world in which there was no fundamental novelty except as God acts in it, meaning miracles. However, the life of each creature might include outward change and development as its God-given potentialities unfold. One might say that the basic image of nature was that of a kingdom, fixed, hierarchical, ordered society under a sovereign Lord. Which means what? That the main idea is that God, in the Bible, created a perfect world. Why would he have to change a perfect world? Everything was done. It was perfect. It was formed. This is how it's going to be. Things don't change. They don't evolve over time, which has major effects for, you'll see, geology, that the earth is changing, evolution, meaning this theory that the earth is static and was created by God in a perfect form has major effects based on the biblical account. One other thing that we'll just briefly touch on is how to read the Bible. Because the Bible, was it to be taken literally or not literally? So again, from a theological perspective, all of these things come together. One is, would God create a world that wasn't perfect? If I'm God, it's like God is going to create a perfect world where earth is in the center. Well, we'll talk about a second why Earth would be in the center. Why would it make sense so if you turn the page to page 8, we'll talk about this right now. Turn the page to page 8, the blue arrow. We'll skip the red arrow for now. You can read it on your own time. But look at the blue arrow on page 8, number 5. If God, well, I guess it's actually 8 and 8. If God was the supreme member of the hierarchy of being in medieval thought, humanity was the center of the cosmic drama. Nature was subordinate to humanity. The functions of creatures lower in the scale were explained mainly by their role in human life, for the world was designed to serve human interests. Nature was primarily the stage setting for drama of God and humanity. World history was understood to follow a divine plan. And then he goes on to talk about the Christian approach, but for our purposes it makes great sense. God created man, and he created the world around him. Not in that order, but the whole world was created to serve man. It's one of the first things that you learn in Mesilat Yesharim, that the world was created to serve good people. And that's how it makes sense. Think about it. How else would I do it if the earth was in the center, the sun was shining light on it to grow plants and to give us light and warmth, and the whole universe was created around the earth, which was in the center. And God, who's also, can do whatever he wants, he's going to create a beautifully perfect world, universe. So there are a couple of things that are very important here. Number one is that theologically, this is how most people thought. They looked at the world through a theological prism, in the sense that everything they viewed was from this perspective of what is God, how is God creating this, how is God going to do this. So they viewed the world as this theological experience, that earth was created for mankind by God in a perfect form, and that the Bible, which God is God's explanation of how he's doing this, is going to be accurate and correct. So this is how most, let's say everyone, almost every religious person, and now these are issues that are not just Jewish. These are Christians and Muslims have these same issues with, if the Bible tells you one thing and science tells you something else, or if science is telling you something that seems to not make sense, it starts to make you think. So we're going to now talk a little history lesson about what changed at this time. So there's a very nice article by someone named Hillel Levine. He described the 150 years from Copernicus through Tycho Brahe and Kepler and Newton as the turning point not only in astronomy, but science and scientific inquiry. So I'll just give you a little history lesson. I don't know if you remember this from, when you were in school, but just to give you a little framework, a little timeline of how things changed. So Copernicus was a Polish priest. He was not an astronomer by trade. He was a priest. And he lived in the from the end of the 15th century to the beginning of the 16th century. He died in 1543, and he was looking up at the stars like most people at this time. I guess they didn't have anything, didn't have internet, so that's what they would do. They would study the stars, and he studies the stars, and he starts thinking about the Ptolemaic system. See, what most people don't realize is the Ptolemaic system that had Earth in the center was beginning. The more people began to study the movement of these spheres, they began to realize like it wasn't working out because the planets seemed to be making turns and it just wasn't working. So the beauty of the Ptolemaic system that had Earth in the center and everything moving around began to not make so much sense. It wasn't so beautiful. So Copernicus came along and thought of what would happen if I put Earth in the sun in the center and everything moving around it in perfect circles. That would be better. So that's what he thought. He didn't publish the book in his lifetime. It was right after he died, and it was very wrong. It couldn't be right. There were a lot of mistakes in his calculations. The circles were inaccurate in terms of understanding how the time of planets going around. So, but he threw this idea out there, and it started getting passed around. Right after he died, someone was born who would really change a lot, and his name was Tycho Brahe. He was given a lot of money to study the stars in Denmark by Rudolf, the king of Prague. Rudolf in Prague. You heard of the scientific revolution that was going on at the end of the 16th century. And he analyzed tons and tons of data. And he had notebooks. They still have them today. Notebooks full of astronomical data, tracing the paths of the stars and the planets throughout the skies where he lived. And he needed people to help him compute the data. So someone by the name of Johannes Kepler, who was escaping the wars that were going on, the religious wars at the time, showed up. He was a mathematician, but fascinating enough, he was also an astrologer, like, the horoscopes. He was doing the horoscopes for the king, meaning he was brought in to do the horoscopes. So just to think about it, the people we claim or we held up as these amazing scientific minds, he was like reading the horoscopes. He was writing the horoscopes, That was his job because at the time there was really very little difference between the two. There was a lot of overlap. So he was the mathematician that began to take all of Tycho Brahe's data and compute it. And he started computing and he said, well, there's a lot of, I can't figure this out, but as a mathematician, I'm going to try to figure out to trace how the orbits work. And he was the one who revolutionized, which to us doesn't seem like such an incredible idea, but it's fascinating in light of what we talked about earlier. He said, well, maybe the orbits, the paths that the planets travel around the sun aren't perfect. They're not circles. They're actually ellipses. But to think about, what's the big deal? Ellipse, a circle, an oval, a square. But to think about it from a theological perspective, that if people at the time were thinking the earth is perfect in its form, all of a sudden he says, wait a second, it's not perfect. It's an ellipse. And not only that, the ellipse they're not perfectly in the middle of this ellipse. So one side is closer to the other. And this really started changing things because he was mathematically proving based on data that the universe, what we had always envisioned for thousands of years, wasn't the way we thought it was, we being people back then. The earth wasn't in the center. It wasn't perfect. And he could prove it based on data. And then you have other players who, depending on who you read about, he's the most important or just a secondary figure. You have Galileo Galilei, who with a telescope finds imperfections in the heavenly spheres, including the moon. And he begins to say, the universe isn't so perfect. So you have people who are beginning to question, began to question this construction of the universe as being perfect, God-given, no problems at all. And then finally, the person who finalized this whole picture was Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton lived in England, 1642 to 1727, probably one of the greatest minds in the history of the world. He mathematically proved why it was that the ellipses were true. Kepler couldn't figure out why it was true. He discovered that there were ellipses, and it was Newton who, using math and physics, understood gravitational pull, which made it that the closer it gets to the sun, the faster it goes, and the further away, the slower it is. So this is just a timeline of history, but it didn't happen overnight. Again, Copernicus lived from 1473 to 1543, and Newton died in 1727. So you have almost 180 years that pass when these theories are being thrown around. So that's just some perspective on how long it took for people to be able to prove it correct and understand it, like why it's true. So just to continue, just to show you a little bit what changed, if you look, we'll skip some of this stuff. We'll skip this here. If you look at the page number 10, this comes from a fascinating book that was once shown to me. It's a very nice book. I think it's out of print. Maybe they reprinted it. It's a book by someone named Carl Becker called The Heavenly City, the Heavenly City of 18th Century Philosophers. And it tries to talk about how the study of the world changed from a study of science, from a philosophical and theological approach to a historical and scientific approach. So for the pages before page 20, he talked about how from theology they changed to history, and now he's going to talk about how they changed the shift from philosophy to science. So he says, besides the historical approach to knowledge, we have another to which we are more committed, the scientific. As history has gradually replaced theology, so science has replaced philosophy. Philosophy, it is true, has managed much better than theology to keep up appearances in the modern world, and at present moment signs are not wanting of refurbishing going in its ancient and somewhat dilapidated dwelling. Yet it is obvious that the undisputed sway which it formerly exercised has long been surpassed by natural science. It's like, imagine if you come home from college and you tell your parents, I'm majoring in philosophy. They, tear kriya, but if you tell them I want to be a doctor, or I want to be a chemist, they're proud of you. So that's what he's saying. In the hands of St. Thomas, philosophy with deductive logic as its instrument of precision was a method of building a rational world, its aim being to reconcile experience with revealed truth. But influences which deposed of succeeding generations to examine the facts of human history induced them to also examine the facts of natural phenomena. The rise of history and of science were but two results of a single impulse, two aspects of a trend of modern thought away from an overdone rationalization of facts to a more careful and disinterested examination of the facts themselves. Meaning, what he's arguing, and he keeps on arguing for 2 pages, is to show you how, before this point in time, if people wanted to explain a phenomenon, what would they do? They'd think about it. How would God create the world if not perfect? If not with the earth in the earth in the center, if not in perfect circles, if not the spheres being beautiful orbs of gas with no imperfections. So that's what people would do. They rationalize their approach to the world around them to understand it. And then things started changing. People started looking for scientific information. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you some of the problems the Jews had to deal with, Jewish people, but these were problems that a lot of religions had to deal with, the theological problems, the biblical problems, and we're going to look at how a few Jewish scholars at the time dealt with it, and then I'll try to frame it in our own lives today. So again, if you look at page 12, this was some of the biggest problems. The literal biblical approaches. So if you look here, this is the story of Bereshit, Genesis, page 12, Bereshit Aleph, Pasuk Yudalid. And we'll just read the English. And God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for nights. That's talking about the sun and the moon. And let them be for the lights in the firmament of the heaven and to give light upon the earth. Meaning, what was the purpose of the sun? To give light to the earth. And God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the firmament of the heaven, and to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day, and so was the 4th day. Meaning, if I were to ask you what was happening up until the 4th day, it's pretty clear that God has created the earth, all the things in the earth that happen. Then he creates the sun and the moon to give the earth, light. So again, this is the literal reading of the text if you are living in a society that believes that the earth is the center of the world. So and it makes a lot of sense. It's perfectly clear. One of the most oft quoted comments by a lot of these scholars at the time is the next verse. This comes from Joshua, page 13. This is, you'll see this quoted in a couple of the texts, and you'll be like, this was the big deal, but this was a really big deal. This is the story of Yoshua. Yoshua is chasing a nation to kill them, the nation of Givon. He's chasing Givon. I actually remember, just a side point, when I was in Yeshivat Shalavim, so we went on a night hike, and they take you to the Ayalon Valley, and they open the Tanakh, and they say, we are standing in Emek Ayalon, the same place where Yoshua held the sun and the moon. So we'll read it together. So it says here, and Hashem said to Yoshua, fear them not, for I have delivered them into your hands, and there not a man will stand against you. Yoshua therefore came upon them suddenly. He went from Gilgal all night, and the Lord discomforted them before Israel, slew them with a great number at Givon, and chased them away, smote them, and then it came to pass that they fled before Israel, and were at the descent of Beit Haron. The Lord cast great stones from heaven upon them, and they died. And there were more who died with hailstones. Then this is pasuk 12. This is where things get exciting. Then spoke Yoshua to Hashem in the day when the Lord delivered upon the Amorites before the children of Israel. And he said to them, he said in the sight of Israel, Sun, stand thou upon Givon, and thou moon in the valley of Ayalon. Meaning, this is the pasuk, Shemesh beGivon dom v'yareach be'emek Ayalon. And the sun stood still, and the moon stayed. Now, if I'm reading this, and my conception of the universe is that the earth is still static and the universe is revolving around it, it's pretty obvious what's happening. The sun and the moon stopped their orbit around the earth. So again, this is the simplest way to read the text in light of just the way people viewed everything. And then lastly, this will also be quoted a little later, page 14. This is a verse from Kohelet. These are the first verses of Kohelet. So if anyone has enough problems with Kohelet, maybe this should have been the problem. These are the words of Kohelet, the son of David, king on Yerushalayim. Vanity, Hevel, Havalim, vanities of vanities, said Kohelet. Vanities, all is vanity. What profit man has of all his labor, where he labors under the sun? One generation passes away, and another generation comes, and the earth abides forever. This is the key line. The sun also rises, the sun sets, and has the place to where it rises. Meaning, the sun is what's moving, and the earth is standing still. So again, I know all of these verses, the literal meaning is what seems to be the problem. But then you have that this is really adopted by the entire culture. If you turn to page 15, the Rambam, again in his Yesodei Torah, in the beginning of again, this is the beginning of his major work, where he lays out how the world is. He describes the universe with a Ptolemaic conception. The earth is in the center, it stays still. The planets revolve around it. So again, the Rambam was obviously getting this from the scientists at the time and the best knowledge he had. Yet still, the fact that the Rambam recorded this, Michael Panitz, who's a historian who has a wonderful article about this topic, he said that by the dissemination of the Rambam's Mishneh Torah, where he codified this as the belief in the world, it made it that this became the Jewish belief. This is what Jews were supposed to believe because Rambam said it. And Rambam believed it, so maybe this is the Jewish belief. So when things started to change, when the new astronomy came out, people started having these doubts, like, what, I don't know, it's against the Torah, it's against the Rambam, what am I to believe? So parenthetically, I saw a couple of historians wrote that Christians had less of a problem with the literal understanding of the Bible because they always have a non-literal reading of the text. Meaning one of the ways that Christians study, I am not an expert on this, but I do know that Christians study the text differently than Jews. It would almost be like they study it pshat and drash together with very little, there's no difference in terms of level. But Jews, the pshat is what, it's a very simplistic way, but some historians say Christians had less of a problem with the literal reading of the Bible, and we'll see that some Jewish scholars had a much bigger problem. So we'll skip the next source, and if you turn to page 19, this is our friend from the beginning of the lecture. He's wearing a strimal. He's not a chassid. He's pre-Hasidim, so he's not a Hasid. But this is Tuvia HaKohen Katz. Again, this is the cover page of his book. It's a typical cover page. Don't think anything exciting about it. This was published in Venice. And if you look at him on the left, this is a picture of him. Like, what's the impression he's trying to give off? His left hand is holding an astroglobe. An astroglobe is the tool that was used to study the stars and measure them. I don't know how to do it, but I know that's what it's for. The right hand is holding a book. What is he trying to say? His left hand is his science. His right hand is his chachma, whether it's Torah or knowledge or wisdom. This is who he is. And he looks very pious and traditional, yet he claims to be a man of science from the picture of him here. And this is a science book, so you should imagine that he would be up with the latest in terms of science. So again, he is living 1650 to 1729, just to tell you what's happening at that point in time. Galileo is dead already. So just that you know what's happened, Galileo is dead, so that's where we're holding in the world of history. Just to give you a frame of reference in terms of how we've developed, in terms of what the universe should look like. So if you look here on the, this is just, we'll run through it quickly, but if you look here on page 20, this is he's going to give you the history of the universe in terms of, yes?
Who was his target audience?
Oh, excellent. His target audience was Jews. He wrote it in Hebrew, because you have this a couple of people who, the Yashar Mikandia, Yosef del Medigo, who's one of these people everyone quotes, also was a Jew who wrote a science book for Jews because he didn't want them to be ignorant. David Gantz, he's like one of these people, like historians like him because he's interesting. He was a scientist and an astronomer and a cosmologist. I mean, he knew the historian. So these people were writing books, and they write in their introduction like, we don't want Jews to be ignorant because we're the laughing stock of the nations. Again, how true that is unclear. Like, how much more ignorant were Jews than other people? I'm not sure. But he's writing this book for Jews. It's clearly for Jews, and you'll see from some of his comments that it's for. Meaning there was no like non-religious Jews. There's like Jews and Christians, and there was like no other area to go to. So when he's writing here, it's clear he's for a Jew, and there's like, oh, he's writing for the frum. No, there's no frum. There's only Jew. So he's writing for the Jews, and you'll see if you hold, you'll see in a second. Yeah, I mean, I'm not. Again, I'm a teacher, so we'll get to that later. Ask me after class. So anyway, here we go. If you look at page 20. This is the Ptolemaic conception of the universe. He says, he starts on the first line on the left page, Hippocrates, or Hippocratic, I forgot what it is. Then he calls Ptolemaeus, who is Ptolemy. And then if you turn the page to the next page, it's Copernicus. And then the top of the next page on the left, it's Tycho Brahe, where he has the geo-helio hybrid model. But then he starts to complain about Copernicus. Now, again, this is the man of science. He's got an astroglobe in his left hand. He agrees with Harvey against the Rambam. So, but look what he writes here. In the bottom of page 21, the bottom of the left page, it says, Perek Gimel, Mevi Svara Acheret, V'hinei hi krova ladat Chazal. I am going to bring the svara acher, another approach that is closest to the words of the rabbi. And if you see there's a red arrow, he has a couple of things he's going to discuss. Chakira hashlishit, im nitna hatnua lekador haaretz v'imlav. Does the earth move or not? Meaning, is it a heliocentric or geocentric universe? So if you turn the page, there are a lot of arrows here, but I'll just show you where the red arrow is. That's where we'll start, and then I'll show you like the line everyone likes to quote. Hayediah hashlishit behechrech ra'uya lekol philosoph elokei sheyibatel dat Copernicus. The third thing we should have to know, and that it's appropriate for every intelligent person to know, is to erase or eradicate the opinion of Copernicus. And then if he goes on to talk about why he's wrong. He says, Mipnei shekatuv bekohelet v'ha'eretz li'olam omedet. It said in Kohelet. Again, he's using biblical verses to disprove Copernicus. That it says in the Tanakh that the world stands, it doesn't move. And then he goes on, Hinech roeh shebekama makomot ha-psukim yitnu eidehen. Many places the psukim tell us that the earth doesn't move. So obviously Copernicus is wrong. And he goes on in where the orange arrow is. I'll just tell you outside for time purposes. Where the orange arrow is, he gives you a svara, a logical disproof for Copernicus. And you find this a lot. He says, it doesn't make any sense. If the earth is moving, why am I not going anywhere? And you find this a lot. You'll find people say, if you shoot an arrow up in the air, it should land far away. If you drop, meaning the common question that any person should ask if you think about the earth moving. So these are his disproofs. Again, his disproofs are 2 psukim in Tanakh, a logical disproof that he just thought of, doesn't make sense. And look what he concludes where the green arrow is. This is very often quoted. Perek Revi'i, Mevi kol ha'te'unot v'harayot atanot. I'll bring all the proofs and arguments asher le Copernicus v'siato, that Copernicus and his helpers bring al amidat hashemesh, on the standing of the sun, v'tnuat ha'aretz, the revolutions of the earth, v'da Ma shetashiv lo. Know how to respond to him, which is obviously an echo to the verse in Pirkei Avot, da ma lahashiv to an apikores. But then he concludes, ki bechor satan hu. He is the firstborn son of Satan. So again, this is the most scientifically advanced man of his time. But what I'll tell you is, and he says Copernicus is wrong, he's off, he totally doesn't make sense. He's the firstborn son of Satan. He's wrong because it's against the Torah. And I'll just tell you, this was not a Jewish phenomenon. This was a religious phenomenon that people felt very scared or endangered from. Not as scared as another. They felt threatened, but they didn't feel threatened like, I'm threatened, what am I going to do? They felt like he's wrong because it's against the Torah, it's against Chazal. So the next page, page 23, is a fascinating work. And I'm not sure, it's hard to appreciate how, again, Tuvia Cohen Katz was a Renaissance man. The next person also, his name was David Nieto. He wrote a book called Mate Dan. Dan is Rashi Tevot David Nieto. And he wrote a book called Kuzari Hasheni, the second Kuzari. The first Kuzari was by Yehuda Halevi, which was a dialogue between an enlightened king who was searching for theology and religion and a rabbi. So David Nieto was the chief rabbi of London. I think he might have been the first, I don't know, he wasn't the first chief rabbi of London. But again, he's living in London at the same exact time that Isaac Newton is living there. Just frame it as that. And he is a rabbi of an illustrious, wealthy, we'll call it modern, but what does modern mean? Modern community. And he has a dialogue, and his community was Sephardic. When I say Sephardic, I mean they left Spain in 1492. They left Spain probably in the 1580s and 90s, which will be a topic of our next session. It's a plug for come next week. But he was talking, the rabbi of these converso Jews who grew up as Catholics or their parents were Catholics, and he's talking to them. So if you turn to page 24, you actually see it's Spanish. This isn't, I don't think it's regular Spanish. I think it's Castilian Spanish. It's not. Their dialogue was Portuguese, but they wrote in Spanish. So I think it's Spanish or high Spanish. The Spanish teacher in school told me that this is not, people don't speak this way anymore. So I can't read it either way, but if you could read certain words, you should know. So he writes here where the big blue arrow is, Amar HaKuzar, meaning the Kuzar, the inquisitive person wants to know. Me'olam lo chashavti ta'anot hatochenim ha'achronim hein miustot al omdei asvara. He wants to know, I want to know, what do you think about the rational, logical opinions of these modern thinkers? And he's clearly talking here about the earth standing still, or does it revolve? So he says, Amar ha'chacham, or Amar ha'chacham, or Amar ha'chaver. I'm not sure which one it is. Vadai shemitkabelet el asvara. Really, you're right. You should really follow logic. Aval ein anu yecholim lahachzik b'munach hazeh b'ma shehu, top of page 25. Shu mevatel, am I top of 25 on that page? Yeah. Shu mevatel tnuat hashemesh. He says, you're right, and we should follow them, but you can't rely on it when it's saying that the sun doesn't move. And look where, again, this is one of the most enlightened people of his generation. As it says, to be Yoshua Ktiv, Hashemesh b'Givon Dom. It says the sun was in the Givon, stood in Givon. V'Ktiv v'Yamod Hashemesh b'Chatzi Hashamayim. And it said the sun stood still. So he's saying, Haresh Sove v'Holech Keshar Kochve Lechet. You see that the sun is moving like everything else. Once again, he gives you a biblical proof, and then they have this back and forth. Well, maybe you can disprove it, maybe you can explain what it means otherwise. And then he says, and where the red arrow is, Amar HaChaver, Dati Nocha Bazemod. I'm leaning this way, and I'm leaning strongly. Ki ani shota b'tzama et divrei Chazal shalamdinu. I am thirsty for the words of the rabbis that I've studied, that I've learned. And this is what he quotes: Rabbi Meir, Egos matzah tocho achal klipato zarak. A nut, you keep the inside, you eat the what do you call it? The nut, I guess, and you throw away the shell. Then he says on the top of 26, Kein roi lanu laso. So too it is appropriate for us to do. V'svaro chachmei umot shekol ma shehu mineged latorotenu akdosha tmimu. He says, so too with the wisdom of the world. Anything that's against the Torah, whether it's Torah shebechtav or Torah shebal peh, sheket tishaktzenu. It's disgusting for us, and you should throw away. Again, I just want to frame this. This is one of the most enlightened people of his generation. At a time when in London they were actually proving this to be correct. So again, he's vehemently against it. In other places, he gives there's a whole, I guess like 20 pages later, he returns to this question and again disproves it, again based on biblical and logical proofs. And then the last source we'll look at inside is the Khatam Sofer, who's the latest of these figures. He lived 100 years after, he lived 1760 to 1839. So this is a much later phenomenon. But to me, again, he was a very, I guess you'd call him ultra-Orthodox. There you go. Maybe he is actually the first ultra-Orthodox person. But he was very conservative with a small c. He was against Reform movement. But he has a very strong approach to what it is we should believe. So again, if you flip the sheet over, this is a comment he has. It doesn't have a page number, but it's from Parshat V'etchanan, Deuteronomy 4:19. Pen tisa inecha shemaima, lest you'll lift your eyes up to the heavens. Ra'ita et hashemesh v'et hayareach, you'll see the sun and the moon. V'et kol kochavim kol tzva shemayim, you'll see all the stars in the heavens, and you might become drawn to bow down to them. But this is where the key line that he extrapolates on. Va'avadetem, and you'll worship them. Asher chalak Hashem Elokecha otam, that God has allotted to these people, l'kol ha'amim tachat kol hashman, that God has allotted to all the people of the world. So what is the verse that God has chalak Hashem Elokecha otam, that God has allotted to them? So this is his explanation. I guess this is not pshat. It's like the opposite. It's like leaving pshat to explain a phenomenon. So one can explain this based on, this is the paragraph with the star at the left, but I just translated into English. One can explain this based on has been taught. That's my typo, so no problem translation. One can explain this based on what has been taught, that Copernicus, one of the sages of the nation, said that the earth revolves around the sun to get the light of the sun. Because how could the pure sun travel and serve the earth? Others bring a proof against him that if the earth revolves, how could it be that one shoots an arrow up in the air and it falls in the same place? Again, you have the disproof of Copernicus. This is like way after all the science has been proven, the same simplistic disproofs. Their proof that uses logic, this is what the theological discussion that I think I want to highlight here. Their proof that uses the logic that the bigger one should serve the smaller. This is only for those of the other nations. But we, Bnei Yisrael, on the contrary, the earth that has man and has the holy nation of Israel are the essence of the creation. And because of them, the entire world was created. All of the celestial spheres were created to serve the earth. Therefore, it is appropriate that all the parts of the universe serve this world that is inhabited by the Jewish people. Based on this, the universe in its entirety has one purpose in its creation. However, so meaning what's the one purpose of the entire universe? To serve the Jewish people, and the Jewish people live on earth. But this is where he gets interesting. However, this is not so according to the nations of the world, that each one has its own world with its own purpose. Meaning, God didn't create the world for the non-Jews, so to them, this is the meaning of the verse, that God allotted them to all the nations. To the other nations, it's a portion. It's only a chelek, a portion of the universe. However, to the Jews, it's one unified system without parts. Again, this is the Khatam Sofer who came much later, and again, you see him echoing this conservative approach to the new science because of both the theological implications and the logical implications of it. So these are some of the ideas, and I want to share with you, we have 5 minutes left and then we have time for questions. There are a couple of, so don't get the impression everyone was against it. There were at the time some scientists who were very pro, some of the enlightened people, but it took a while. And the standard became what Rav Hirsch says. Like if I asked any of you, how do you explain any of the psukim, you'd quote Rav Hirsch. So this is page 32 and 33 in your book, in your packet. This is again the pasuk in Tehillim. V'hu kechatan yotzei michupato, yatzis ki gibor larutz orech. It's referring to the sun. The sun leaves its chamber like a bridegroom. It steps forth. It rejoices in the power to run its course, meaning the sun is running its course. So if you look, so I'll just tell you what Rav Hirsch says outside. It's on page 138 in the commentary. He says, we'll read it together. So if you look on page 33 in your packet, it's the right column, the second paragraph, and it says, David, as do all the Holy Scriptures, talk in the language of man. Dibra Torah kilashon b'nei Adam. He speaks the speech of men to men. This language is the same of that of Copernicus and Kepler and Newton, meaning all of, I guess, I'm not going to take a poll because we don't want to embarrass anyone, but if I asked everyone in the room, does the sun stand still and the earth revolve around it, I'm sure all of you would say yes. But if I asked you what time is, what happened at 5 o'clock, you'd say the sun set. It's not true. The sun, you're a lie. The sun didn't set. The earth rotated. And if I say what's going to happen in a couple hours, you'll say the sun will rise. So he's saying that even Kepler, Copernicus, and Newton, the men who understood this, they all speak in this language of idiom. So he's saying the Torah also speaks in Dibra Torah Kalashon B'nei Adam. And this is what he gets beautifully. He says, for it is not the aim of the Holy Scripture to teach us astronomy, cosmogony, or physics, but to guide man in the fulfillment of life's task within the framework of the constellation of his existence. For this purpose, it is quite irrelevant whether the course of the days and the years is determined by Earth's revolution about the sun or the latter's orbit about the former. The Scriptures will have achieved their purpose if only man's spiritual ear will remain attuned to the understanding of speech of heaven and of earth. Meaning, the Torah was not written as a science book. So all the psukim that we brought earlier to explain, is it a geocentric, heliocentric world, is irrelevant in his mind. Because the Torah was only written for us to understand it. Just parenthetically, this same argument was said, does anyone know by who? It was said by Galileo in his Inquisition trial. He said, your Bible tells you how to get to heaven, but it doesn't tell you anything about the heavens. So it's the same thing, meaning the Bible is a moral, ethical text that's supposed to teach us about how to live. The last page you have here, a beautiful essay by Yeshayahu Leibowitz. I don't have time to go into it, but he basically argues that Maimonides' argument of looking at the sky, if you look here on page 36, it's the last page, the blue arrow. He says, while science provides information concerning the nature of the world, including man's own nature, which does not make any difference to faith and values, the religious consciousness is focused on the acknowledgement of the consequence of man's stance before God, to worship and to serve. What is to accept the yoke of Torah and the mitzvos? Religious faith is not knowledge that such and such is the case. It is decision made by a man of faith. And he goes on to distinguish that throughout the Middle Ages, science was the way people got to God. But now, science is not the model. Now, this is not everyone, and not Jonathan Sacks, I don't think, has this approach. But this is one way of looking at it, that it doesn't matter. Today, there's still people arguments. Is the world in the center? Is it not in the center? And to my own opinion, I think the approach of Rav Hirsch is the most palpable to all of us as thinkers, that if we have a faith in God, that the world was created and the Torah is our guidebook, it's a way of attaining spiritual heights, not of understanding what's up there. So this is my presentation. I hope you enjoyed and learned something new. Just before I would love questions. I love questions, and feel free to ask. But next week, in honor of Hanukkah, we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is, did Sfardim and Ashkenazim get along? And the answer is no. But we're going to talk about why, and we're going to talk about a time period much later than Professor Roth. Professor Roth was talking about Middle Ages. We're going to talk about the early modern period, specifically the early 18th century in a little city called Hamburg. But its neighboring city, Altona, was like two governments, and they always fought, and the Jews in both places fought, and it was socioeconomic reasons. So that's what we're going to talk about Hanukkah. It's next week, 8 o'clock. You have plenty of times for your Hanukkah party to get back. You're more than welcome to come. The packets, you can keep them or leave them, and I'll recycle them. Literally recycle. I'll use them again. So don't worry. Any questions? Yes. It doesn't matter. I interrupted him in the middle last time, so let's go over there.
Was there any countervailing writings to Tuvia Cohen? Because that was well after Galileo, and it was effectively accepted, even though he was tried by the Inquisition. It was sort of a mock trial. It was political more than it was intellectual.
Right. I think in the religious climate at the time, like religious people, it wasn't uniformly accepted. Meaning amongst scientists, I think it was, and people, but I don't think it was religiously accepted. Meaning you have a couple of these texts. There are like a lot of articles. Historians like studying, like, I've found in my own study of historians, you have to ask the question, why is a historian writing a book about someone like Tuvia Cohen Katz? Is it to make fun? Is it to show how these rabbis were closed-minded? Like, why is he writing the book? So I find often it's like that, like, oh, look, the rabbis, they're so backwards. But if you think about it, he's defending a 2,000-year-old belief system for a phenomenon that's 50 years old. So there were a lot of more negatives than pros, and you find negatives continuing throughout, even to this day. And I'm saying Christian and Jewish, but there wasn't anyone specifically that wrote about him. I don't think so. But I have a supplemental, an appendix to this where you'll have 5 more, 10 more in both directions. So, there are people who were pro at the time. David Gantz lived in Prague, and he tells stories about talking to Tycho Brahe and Kepler. And, he says, I quote you a Zohar or a Gemara that says that the earth was never in the center and the earth revolved around the sun. So you have other figures. I just want to show you that these are even the most enlightened people at the time were taking a conservative religious approach. Question.
Yeah, I was going to follow up on that. I could understand right after Galileo,
Right.
Even though they already had telescopes.
Mm-hmm.
By the time you get into the 1800s, the sun software is still talking about it.
Right.
But people can just look out, with their telescopes and see them, the stars and the Earth.
To me, the Khatam Sofer writing it is not that's not a problem. It's if you think about who are the people who are writing about evolution now, it's not the biggest rabbis. It's the scientist rabbi or the, more modern rabbi, because the rabbi that was just sitting and learning Shulchan Aruch, these aren't the questions that bother him. So he's not an expert in a Khatam Sofer. He probably didn't go to school. Again, the world was much smaller then. So I don't know. I don't have a defense. He was holding on to a old system in order to keep the tradition that he felt. Again, it's not crazy. If you view the world theologically, it makes the most sense that the earth should be in the center. So I'm saying, I mean, it makes sense. So I don't think it's silly. I've read a lot of articles, and some of them are disturbing in how dismissive they are of these people. These were the giants of their time, trying to hold on to what they felt was correct. And it didn't make sense logically. It was against the Torah that they believed was authoritative, and they felt it hard. So, they're trying to deal with it in the best way they can. Meaning, you'll say, "Oh, I'll give them a science book." They'll say, "A science book. I have the Torah." So, I mean, again,
Give him a telescope.
right? I couldn't tell by looking at. I don't know. Yeah. Sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah. Sorry.
The reason that some so forth against it is not because he was a scientist. I mean, they say his motto was Chodosh Osam Min HaTorah.
Right.
So anything that's so, he was fighting against reform. So his mindset was to show that there can't be anything new in the Jewish conception.
100%. Right. Well.
Even though he was
Right.
very far
Right. And
out of time.
but I could have showed you other. There are other people. You're 100% right that I was ultra conservative, small c, ultra conservative in that respect. But again, these are people who they feel are dealing with issues that are life altering to their entire existence. So it's not crazy to me that he would say something. If ever, I'm gonna tell you, look up at the sky, be like, I'm looking at the same thing you are. You're gonna show me you go to the planetarium. They show you a bajillion stars. They say, look, oh, that's the nebula. I'm like, okay, that's what you're telling me. I'm looking at it my way. So it's not crazy to me. I mean, just to give you the frame of mind that these people were not off. Yes, question, sorry. That's my father, so.
Well, let me change the question. I mean, the way I see it is that these rabbis were very conservative. They would hold on to their beliefs until they had a telescope and they couldn't deny anymore that the sun did not rotate. But if you take evolution, they're looking at dinosaur bones, they can still say these are not millions of years old, and they'll hold on to every belief that you can't physically see yourself.
So we'll talk about dinosaurs in a couple of weeks, 3 weeks. But again, these things don't. I mean, you'll find basically three approaches in standard. But this is what I find rabbinic and Christian writings. Number one, it's not true. It's there to trick us. I've seen this in Christian writing, so it's and these are enlightened people. They're there. It's either it's fake, it's made up, or they're there to trick us. People write God, Satan sent. I'm killing my whole presentation next time, but Satan sent them, or you'll find people say, "Oh no, this is what the Torah always said." You just have to read it differently. You'll find these approaches. People by nature are conservative if you're religious, so it's hard to change your whole. But I'm saying this was the whole way they looked at the world. The whole universe has shifted, and then you're like, well, look up in the sky. His whole world was just being shattered amongst him, and he's got to hold on to something. Yeah, sorry, she had her hand up. Sorry.
You mentioned a couple of times about the Maimonides was, for Galen against, but Maimonides was living in a time, 1100, where no one knew any differently. Maimonides was a scientist.
Right.
And absolutely swore by what he was seeing as a scientist and said it was the rabbi's responsibility to be a scientist.
Right, that's what's most fascinating, that his text, he was a scientist, and everything he writes was based on the best science of the times, which was wrong, which is not his fault, but even the astronomy that he quotes is clearly based on the astronomy of the time. So, what would Rambam do? I don't know, it's like a bumper sticker. What would Maimonides do? But I don't know what he would say. But because he wrote it and he was an authoritative religious figure, it became more than just a scientist. Because he wasn't just a scientist to me.
He said that you have to look at the world and change your opinion when things change.
Well, that's I want right.
If he had been around.
Right, but that's what I'm trying to tell you. But Tuvia Cohen Katz and David Nieto were the Rambams. I mean, obviously they're not his level, but they're like, listen, you're going to tell me this is what it is? This is a new theory. We've been using this one for thousands of years. It's much better. But I'm saying, at the time, the science was so new and fresh that it was like, like I just to understand how quickly things change. Like Pluto is not a planet anymore, and like that didn't even register. Like most people's like big deal scales of their, because things are so, things change so much now, so rapidly. Back then, like there was like one thing they believed in for like 2,000 years, and then all of a sudden things change in 150 years. I mean, what would the Rambam say? Maybe he would, I have no idea, but the scientists at the time, I'm not an expert on this, we're not sure. We're highlighting those people that pushed it forward. Copernicus wasn't sure. His system was totally wrong. It was like off, like it's impossible to have existed. The times are wrong, the rotations are wrong. It was wrong, and yet he's the one everyone holds up to be this amazing, beacon of light in a time of darkness. It was totally wrong. It took Kepler and Tycho Brahe and Galileo to make it make sense. I mean, you understand what I'm saying? Like the scientists themselves hadn't figured it out 100%. I mean,
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, if Maimonides had looked through a telescope and seen what he saw, he would have believed what he would have seen, not what he would have believed yesterday.
I don't know. I don't know. I'm not we have Maimonidean scholars here. That's not my part. Yes, sorry.
I've always been struck that for all Jewish scholarship, we really don't have a very strong scientific tradition.
Right.
And one of the things, I mean, when you bring up religious arguments, you can see why there are issues with certain types of observations. But what I'm really puzzled, unless you know a lot more about this than I'm likely to, is we don't seem to have a tradition very much of Jewish mathematicians, which you would think...
I thought that was wrong information. Right.
No, which you would think, seeing as it's essentially a purely rationalistic idea, very divorced from theology, there might have been something there. Now, I'm not aware of it.
Right. I thought you were going in a different direction, and then I was gonna answer the different direction question. Jews were not really scientists because they weren't allowed to be. They weren't allowed to go to university. So, I mean, that could be the answer to the mathematician question. The real first Jewish doctors were Moranos because they were Christian, and they were going to Christian universities in Spain and other places like that. And then Italy, Padua is the first medical school that allows Jews. That's where Tuvia, HaKohen Katz, don't hold me against this YouTube. Anyway, I think that's where he went. So like maybe that's the answer to the question, that they weren't allowed in these universities of higher education.
Mathematicians seem to be different. There are a lot.
Right, I don't. That's a good question.
Who simply pop up out of nowhere. They're self-taught and.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, because also like you find that the rabbis had a certain knowledge of math. Like I have no idea. I'll answer. I have no idea, but it's a very good question. I mean, like they say, the Vilna Gaon wrote a math book in the bathroom. So
the answer is that science and theology and philosophy were not separate.
Right.
Science was called natural philosophy.
But that was back then, right?
Yeah, back then, and it was always science and theology were the same.
Right.
There was a branch of it called natural science, natural philosophy, we call it.
Right.
And it was closed to Jews.
No, but that's not my point.
Right.
The point is that mathematics is in many ways a very separate discipline.
It's rational.
It's rational without any.
Yeah, I don't. It's a very legitimate question. I'm not aware.
They took the best minds of the Jewish world and put them in the yeshiva instead of...
No, that's not why. I mean, that's a. Yeah. Hi.
No, I just wanted to make
Sorry.
one comment. I mean, now, most of the people that you discussed here in their writings, I mean, these were not really, great popular leaders. In fact, it seems to me that this was not an issue that the Amcha was concerned about at all.
Right.
Because you had Kabbalah, Shulchan Aruch, Ramah, Ashkenazim, Tzfardim, Shiachei Sheker, and all these things going on, which really roiled the whole Jewish populace.
Right.
So apparently, this was not a question
Right.
that Amcha,
it's a very legitimate question.
They may not have been Talmudic scholars in the way that Joe is talking about,
Right.
but they may be locally well known in their area.
Right, but I think what's important to understand is
They haven't
again.
left their mark on Talmudic scholarship,
Right.
but they left their mark on
Right, but I think that's 100% true. I don't know your name, but that's 100% true. And the only reason I know your name is Joe is because you said what Joe was saying. So what Joe is saying is true also. I think we have to ask the question of, did the people then care? If your rabbi got up and said, the world is in the center, earth is in the center of the universe, did the people, he's a radical, did the people care? I don't know the answer to these questions. I'm getting, Rabbi Ganakis standing up. It means I think my time is done. But I'll be back next week, and we're going to learn about something a lot less controversial. But